This review was made possible thanks to G2PO.com and GamersGate.com. Download games anytime, anywhere. Hello everybody, Don't Blink here again, and today I'm going to be reviewing XCOM Enemy Unknown. I've spent about 18 hours playing this game, and so far I've really been enjoying it. I'm going to be talking about kind of the basic features of the game for those of you who haven't been following this game's development. It came out last week, and it's taken me a while to put together this review just because I did a review of Dishonored last week, and also I've been really engrossed in this game. I've spent quite a bit of time with it already, and I think that it's a very solid game that's definitely worth your hard-earned dollars. But I'm going to go into my specific reasons for giving that recommendation in just a little bit. But first of all, here are kind of the basic features, the basic overview of what this game is all about. It's a turn-based strategy game centered around an alien invasion of Earth. And the meat of the game is the on-the-ground missions where you deal face-to-face with the alien threat. But there are also generous helpings of resource management and base building built into the game. You have to keep XCOM member countries happy by protecting them and aiding their research. You have to build up your base, maintaining power levels, detection, and research capabilities. You have to research alien anatomies and technologies to improve your weapons and equipment. And you have to recruit and train new soldiers, scientists, and engineers. One added feature that doesn't really fall into the kind of general structure of the game, but which I really enjoyed and thought that it was very useful in many ways, was you can customize your soldiers in order to tailor your squad's capabilities to any given mission. And something that I took to quite early on in my single-player campaign was changing the colors of my squad members' armor pieces so that I could easily identify which class they were members of on the field of battle. So it's little things like that, just those tiny little features that really add up to make this game into what I believe to be a very rewarding experience. And with that basic overview out of the way, I do want to move on to kind of the more specific pros and cons that I had with this game. So first up, I want to talk about gameplay and just kind of the overarching feel of the experience of playing XCOM Enemy Unknown, at least in the single-player campaign. The gameplay, in my opinion, conveys a real sense of tension. I felt nervous while playing this game, but not in a bad way. It's not like a horror movie or a horror game where you're just dreading to see what happens next. It's more like when you're watching a really close sports game where you're just really hyped up and really, I don't know, kind of on the edge of your seat about what's going to happen next. That's how XCOM feels when you're in the heat of battle. It feels like a really intense game of chess or checkers or a sports game, something like that. XCOM forces you to make really tough choices and then live with the consequences. There's actually an Iron Man mode where the game will automatically save after every single turn that takes place. So if you make a mistake, there's no going back. You can't revert to an earlier save. You're stuck with one autosave that you can't turn it off or turn it on. It's always on, and it's very unforgiving. But while it does mean that mistakes are very severely punished and never forgiven in that instance, it also means that on the other end of the spectrum, wins become incredibly satisfying. When you pull off a good maneuver or you get a kill that was kind of not very likely, then it's very satisfying and it feels very rewarding in a way that a lot of games don't really do anymore. They kind of guide you by the hand, and XCOM doesn't do that. It's, the revitalization of the XCOM series from the 90s, and it does kind of have that old school feel to its gameplay in terms of that unforgiving nature. And while some people might think that it makes the game too hard, I felt like it was kind of refreshing to actually be completely responsible for the choices that I made while playing this game. In terms of the content that was included, in the base game of XCOM Enemy Unknown. I felt that there was a generous number of tile sets, and that kind of kept the levels fresh. It also really established a solid atmosphere for the game and made me feel like the world that I was interacting with and kind of living in during the course of the game was, you know, while not a very realistic world, it was a coherent world with kind of its own logic and structure to it. And I did feel while I was playing it that, hey, these levels feel like real places. They feel like they fit within the XCOM universe very, very well and very neatly without feeling too gamey, I guess you could say. Additionally, there was a decent number of mission types included in the game. There were pure exterminations where you just, you know, showed up somewhere and had to kill all of the aliens. There were also UFO landings and UFO crashes. There were VIP escort missions, terror missions. Terror missions are basically where there are civilians strewn about the level in addition to actual aliens, and you have to save the civilians and kill the aliens without the two of them meeting, or at least minimizing the number of conflicts between those two factions during the mission. The classes in the game are very distinct, and none of them really feel under or overpowered. I felt that all four of them kind of had their own place within the universe and within missions and battles, and they definitely all had some strengths and some weaknesses that made the gameplay itself compelling and really forced me to really think about every single turn that I made and every single character that I used. Similarly, the different enemy types in the game really do require seriously different tactics, strategies, and maneuvers. You can't treat all of the different enemies the same way because they really do have, you know, different strengths, weaknesses, capabilities, movement patterns, things like that. So if you go into a mission expecting one sort of mix of enemies and it's the exact opposite mix of enemies, then you're going to have a difficult time of it. And you really are going to notice that you came ill-prepared to that particular battle. So those were my pros. Now I want to move on to my cons because there are quite a few. All of them are relatively minor and I feel like they don't really take away from the experience. But they were things that I noticed and things that time and time again did kind of frustrate me with the game. So first up, the user interface is not very polished. They really could have used quite a bit more work fine-tuning it and getting all of the tiny little bugs out of it, because some of the interface buttons sometimes don't work. Choosing which tile to move to can be extremely finicky, extremely hit or miss. And, you know, that's huge in a game like this where every single move that you make really truly matters. And if you misclick and send one of your squad members to a tile that you don't want them to go to, that can get them killed, that can get them out of position so that they can't attack an enemy that you need to kill within a certain number of turns. And overall, you know, having those misclicks, especially as a result of, you know, poor interface design or poor tile detection and stuff like that, that's a huge problem with the game currently. And while, you know, it doesn't take away from the experience as a whole, it is something that definitely should be worked out through patches or otherwise. Additionally, if one thing that they could maybe implement in order to improve the tile detection for movement's sake would be a top-down view. Currently, it's always isometric. I feel like a top-down view could really solidify the tile selection system and make that a lot easier for the player. Additionally, voice acting in XCOM Enemy Unknown is really, truly awful. I don't know if this is just some sort of intentional effort on the part of the developers in order to kind of convey a B-movie type feel, but it's really cheesy and poorly performed, and I was not a fan of the voice acting at all.
It's currently unclear how or...
Perhaps
That's because this is outside your field of expertise, Doctor. If what you're saying is true, this object is an antenna, one that's receiving a signal.
That signal, can we trace it?
No, at least not yet. We would first need to determine its encryption algorithm.
My team can handle that.
In that case, I will focus on constructing an interface between this object and our global communications array, which we'll need to trace the signal.
Then it looks like researching this crystal should be our top priority.
I also ran across a few bugs during my playtime with the game, outside of just the user interface issues that I spoke about earlier. Sometimes roofs and ceilings don't peel away, so you're just staring at the top of a building when you should be able to see inside of it. And that makes it impossible to basically do anything with your squad members. You can't see which tiles you're selecting, and so you can't send them to the tiles that they ought to be sent to. So obviously that's a big problem. I also experienced a few crashes, a bit of freezing, some camera glitches. Sometimes the camera would somehow end up under the map, or it would get stuck focusing on an enemy when you really should be focused on squad members so that you can move them or something like that. And occasionally it would just continue panning to one side or the other no matter what I did, and I had to basically mash on buttons until it would stop moving the camera one way or the other. The cinematic graphics in XCOM Enemy Unknown are kind of weak. They use the same models and textures as the regular zoomed out isometric gameplay, and this is a common problem with a lot of games where the normal view is kind of zoomed out. But still, there are a lot of moments in the game that are zoomed in quite a bit for cinematics and intermission stuff and customizing your soldiers and things like that. And, when the graphics are zoomed in that way, they do look a little bit lackluster, a little bit mediocre. And finally, my last con that I had with XCOM Enemy Unknown, and this is something that oftentimes bothers me and no one else, but I'm a bit of a stickler when it comes to sound. I noticed occasional sound pops and cracks during my playtime of the game, especially with the voiceovers. They would just, pop and crack every once in a while, and I know it's a nitpicky little criticism of mine, but it was something that kind of detracted from my experience. So, having gone over a basic overview of the game as well as my pros and cons, I now want to talk kind of about the overall experience that I had with XCOM Enemy Unknown. I've spent 18 hours with the game thus far, and I still feel as though I barely scratched the surface in terms of what it has to offer. It has a real sense of depth, and it really, truly challenges you. And it does those things, and I feel like this is the most impressive feat that this game accomplishes. It does those things without ever feeling overly complex or difficult, and that's huge. I never played any of the earlier XCOM games, and I'm not a huge fan of turn-based strategy games just in general, but I still loved this game, and I never felt like it was unfair. Its production values may not be all that great, but the design that drives the experience is rock solid, and that's where this game really shines, and I feel like that's what really counts in terms of this game in particular. Some games, if their production values are not up to par, they suffer as a whole, but XCOM, I feel like it could look like a PlayStation 1 game, and I would still love it. That's just how strong the gameplay of this game really truly is. So anyway, that's it for my review. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think of XCOM Enemy Unknown in the comments to this video, and I will talk to you all later. Have a good one. Bye.